Whenever I have put forward sort of ideas for rejoining the EU or sort of things like that, um, I get a lot of people saying, "No, we don't want you back." Your ideas are quote too unrealistic. When I said many times, it's going to be a negotiation. Things are going to happen. You don't know what the current EU is going to be like. You don't even know what the UK's negotiating position is going to be like. And when we're looking at things at the moment where you can see that there will be a very, very heavy agreement probably with the UK and the EU, especially when it comes to defence when Labour come in. Won't surprise me if talks on like something like that are currently even ongoing right now. But you've got even the EU saying, well, yeah, we are looking at ways uh, to sort of rebuild ties with, the incoming future UK government, which is going to be, changing to sort of, Keir Starmer. So there's all kinds of things that can potentially happen in the future. We don't know. I crystal ball gaze. I make predictions. Am I going to be right? I don't know. I don't know. But eventually, all I care about is eventually that we do get back into the EU, and that is the path that we go on to. And I am very pleased to say that for the first time in a while, we now have an EU leader saying this, that actually a big majority would be thrilled to have the UK back. So I'm going to go over this because I think it's well worth going over. When you hear people within the EU Parliament say things like this, I think it sets a very, very positive tone for us to, eventually rebuild bridges towards the EU, especially if Donald Trump gets into America. But also rebuild those ties, which, well, Boris Johnson and co and all the rest of the Brexiteers just, burnt down to a crisp. But those are going to take time to sort of rebuild and, retrack on. So I think it's well worth going over this. But before we do go over that, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And also down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a notification link called Buy Me Coffee. We can Buy Me Coffee. And of course, as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way. So let's go over to the East Anglia Byline Times with their story on this, with its titled EU Leader. Big majority would be thrilled to have the UK back. So, Terry Reintke, I think that's how you say it, my former colleague and co-president of the Greens/EFA group in the European Parliament, is an MEP who has represented Germany since 2014 and is a lifelong friend of the UK and founding member of the EU-UK Friendship Group. Her lively hope and constant energy for a campaign to keep the friendship alive is an inspiration to us all. She recently took the time out of a busy schedule to have an interview with me on the East Anglia Byline Times with Our Place is in Europe series. So for me, leaving behind all the wonderful experts I'd known in Brussels and my time and MEP colleagues and staff in the Green Party and so on was kind of a bereavement when I vacated my seat back in January of 2022. So, did they miss us too, I wonder? Or have they grown glad that we have gone? You're always here with me, Terry says, pointing to pictures of several UK 2019 Green MEPs standing on her filing cabinet. But of course, it's horrible. I'm not going to lie. We miss you very much. We miss you as people, but we also miss the way you did politics. The British MEPs, well, she smiles, let's say the ones in our part of the chamber, obviously the intriguing speeches given in English in plenary have all gone. With Terry's obvious reference to Nigel Farage and his Brexit group, I asked if they might be happy to be rid of us, even if she's sad at losing her Green colleagues. Perhaps some things are possible with us are just completely out of the way. Others, such as the progress of the European Green Deal and other important projects. Yes, a bit, and in two ways, Terry suggests. For us Greens, obviously, we've had a bit of a hit as a group. You were a very sizable delegation with a very strong Green group. It is more likely that you can achieve strong Green policies. But I still think that we managed to move on at least things forward and achieved much more in this legislature than the last one, partly because some of the most outspoken people who were trying to block it from happening have also left. But Other than that, she says, it's not much. It's not so much in the European Parliament that the UK's absence makes a difference, but in the Council. She says, I hear people say, okay, with the UK, this would have been much more difficult. Specifically, the Resilience and the Recovery Fund of some of the social legislation that we've managed to get across the line. He said, I get the reasoning, she adds, but I also will always say that I think this is largely due to the fact that the UK had governments that never really wanted to be a leading force in shaping EU policy. Instead, they were always trying to block things coming from Brussels. It has been a disastrous missed opportunity and having a devastating consequences for both the EU and the UK. That the damage has been particularly severe for the UK. The UK government has given more. The UK government, pardon me. Let me start again. Let me put my teeth back in. A UK government with a more constructive attitude could have shaped the European project for good and could still in the future, given, as she puts it, the sizable influence that the UK has. So, as I've said before, if you have a UK government that is like, okay, our places in Europe, our standing as a country in the world is to be a European country and to sort of work with our European partners to go and get things done. I think that is a very, very good attitude for any future UK government to have. And I would certainly advocate for any future UK government to have that. But unfortunately, well, we've had pretty much a Brexiteer, very much so Brexiteer government in charge for that time. So, this year is a European Parliament is now holding elections for over 705 MPs across 27 nations. For Terry, it's the first time the UK will not be electing EMPs, both being part of the European family, determining our joint future for the next 5 years. It is a point of sadness for us both. Brexit has been an extraordinary removal of democratic and citizenship for the UK population and also for EU citizens still in residency in this country. Engineered under the gesture that we would benefit from a gain in sovereignty and a myth of needing, quote, to make our own laws, yet we had more say in European laws than in Westminster, where 43% of our population gave votes to the Conservatives, just an 80-seat majority. As our government desperately searches for the so-called Brexit benefits, I ask her if they laugh at us. Terry smiles. One of the things I think I started a lot of laughter, but also shaking heads. Was this whole thing about wine that can be sold in pints? My father was like, "This is what they did it for. This is the big Brexit." But it continues, hope for union. But we do both believe the UK will rejoin. And when it happens, it will be under a government that sees membership and participation as an opportunity, saying, then we're going to get a much more constructive way of engaging with us on the level of the EU Council, Terry says. Despite her optimism, I do see still political problems as the EU eyes the UK. We look very dodgy at the moment on human rights, on the rule of law, protection of democracy, protection of minorities. That would be a barrier, wouldn't it? Terry agrees. I can tell you the Rwanda legislation is something that is very, very questionable when it comes to human rights. This is not only from a European perspective, but also from the perspective within Britain. You've had court cases in the UK itself, and it's not coming from the European level even. I don't think the Rwanda policy at this moment is going to work at all. I think this is probably just dead in the grass because there is no way it passes through the House of Lords. And at the moment, it's looking like it's going to be battered back to the chamber. And of course, you're going to get another psychodrama about this whole Rwanda legislation, and it's not going to work. The Rwanda plan is yet a number of recent UK policies that are problematic for the EU. She said, so there'd be probably an accession procedure. We've always said that there would be. Terry explains, where we'd look at the policies where the Copenhagen Agreement would have to be fulfilled. That is true for every country that wants to join the European Union. So they'd have to take a look at the policies, Copenhagen criteria. As I've said before, a lot of this stuff, even though a lot of people don't believe me, that's very negotiable. I think the euro going to be very negotiable. I don't think that the EU is going to say, well, no, you have to join the euro. I think that's very negotiable. Given, as we said, there are countries in the EU right now aren't in the euro. Are you seeing the Europe and the EU trying to force those countries into the euro? Are you going to see the EU force, Denmark into joining the euro? I don't think so. But even if we did join the euro, it's not a loss for me. it's hey, I've said I'll end up ideal location should be back in the EU. Doing some of this is not going to be that hard as people are making out to be. But it continues. What would be the political conditions here in the UK needed for us to be able to start those accession discussions? Does Terry get the sense that we're close to having the right attitude and opinions? So where could that move us in the right direction? Or are we going further away? Would we need proportional representation first? Would we need an end to extremism in the Conservative Party? Terry's response is encouraging. She believes the priority is to have a stable majority in favour of rejoining. And again, that's what a lot of us have said right from the very beginning. We need to build that stable majority. And that does seem to be going very, very much in our favour on that direction. So she said, I don't mean a 52-48%, she adds. I think this is achievable given how we are seeing polls consistently showing over 60% that say Brexit was a mistake. So, not just prompted by temporary outrage at something. There is, of course, one issue that does concern her. The more the UK diverges on legislation, the harder rejoining becomes. So we have to be honest about that, Terry says. It will come at a cost for the UK. That will be very true. But also, when it comes to legislation, some of that stuff, you would pass something like an EU alignment bill. And remember, we did that before. We have passed such bills before. It is not impossible to do that again. So I am very, very confident that we can realign and get in ways with where we can realign on EU legislation. I think that is more than possible to do. We've done it before. We can very seriously do it again if we have a government that is serious about doing that. But it would continue. Tough accessions, though, have become the norm for the EU, and the UK's wouldn't be as hard as some. She points to the agenda of the current expansion, with Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, and others who are all in accession talks. This, Terry believes, creates a climate to open the possibility of rejoining happening, though she does observes that the request needs to come from the UK. The EU is not going to take the initiative to invite us back in. Again, we've always said it would be the UK that would need to initiate these talks. So, urgency for democratic unity. As the EU considers expansion, we're currently living through troubled times. Globally, there is a growing sense of urgency for democracies to stick closer together, Terry points out. This is even more obvious than it was 5 or 10 years ago. Just look what's happening in Ukraine. There are also so many of what's in the US. And it was after this interview that Trump then suggested as president, he'd scupper NATO, underscoring her point. Close to home, Germany is one of 7 countries that sees the resurgence of the far right. But at least in her country, a number of people are out on the streets protesting about it is encouraging. Absolutely, she responds. And I also think this is what is so strong about democracy in the UK. You have a Supreme Court that tells the government what it can and cannot do. You have active citizens. So, yeah, again, good point on that. The Supreme Court is very good, but of course you have Liz Truss calling for the dissolution of things like that. So, rallying for the rejoin them. During the Brexit campaign, she adds, you look at how many people stood up for the European Union, how many massive demonstrations you've had, like the People's Vote March in London, when 1 million people took to the streets. I think a very strong citizens movement is what is really needed right now. In the UK, this has a very strong pro-European citizens movement and can counterbalance the authoritarian backlash that we're facing. Despite this, grassroots movements have successfully pivoted towards rejoin, backed by the European Movement UK. So I hear many people saying, oh, they wouldn't want us back. Don't deceive yourselves into things. We could get back soon. Terry has an answer for them. I say I can only reiterate what I've said many times, Catherine. I think a very, very big majority of people would be thrilled to have the UK back in the EU. That is music to my ears. So, yeah, um, yeah, I think that's very, very positive, especially coming from someone like that as an MEP. I think that's very positive stuff from that. But again, we've got lots of work to do still here in the UK. I think certainly getting more across the pro-European stance, what we stand to gain, the positivities of being part of the EU, just the realities of the UK at the moment does need to be sort of a European nation. That means being again in the EU. And I think when you've got Labour saying, well, actually, we're going to look at working more closely together with Europe, that's a big, big step, I think, in the right direction. And eventually, we will get back in. It is, I think, eventually is it is. It's a matter of well, when, maybe, not if, maybe at this point, but soon it could be a matter of if, not when. Who knows? But we are going in the right direction on that travel. So that is, again, very, very positive things to hear. And again, we are going in the right direction. It's the direction of travel that if you are pro EU, we want to see, we want to go in, and where we want to go. So, hey, it's more than positive news for me. So, as always, thank you very much, of course, for watching. And of course, we'll see you all next time.